everyone, I'm Ari here with Rachel and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 317 asking how should new writers approach editing? Before we start, don't forget to visit and follow our Ko-fi page where you can access lots of free goodies. If you're in a position to support us financially, you can become a Merry Writer for $2 a month and get exclusive monthly content. Everything earned on Ko-fi goes into keeping the show going and we really do appreciate any support. Okay, so we're back with another editing episode. Because why the hell not? So if you're a new writer and you've not been writing for a very long time, but you have maybe finished your manuscript, first of all, congratulations. That is really impressive. Second of all, you're going to want to start editing it. Now, you could be the sort of person who was editing it as you were writing. Don't worry, I often do that myself. It's not always the best way, but if it works for you, that's what we do. But if you're now getting to the point where you want to start editing, I admit it can be quite overwhelming. Even if you've been writing for a long time, it can be quite overwhelming when you come to edits because the writing part is very long. The editing part is often longer. And you don't always realize that when you first start out writing. So, first of all, it's good to know the different types of edits. And I don't care if we've talked about this before on this podcast or even a few episodes earlier. I don't care. We're doing it again. So the main edits are developmental, also known as structural. And that is for big things. That is where you look at pacing, you look at story structure, you look at plots, you look at story arcs, character development, world building, dialogue, things like that. The big, chunky, meaty pieces. Then you've got your line editing, and this is where you go through line by line and you look at style choice and word choice, flow, to see if there's anything you can cut or change or enhance about the writing. This can often be in the sense of rephrasing sentences, changing and cutting paragraphs, maybe amending word choices for something stronger. This is often where you start noticing that you're using the same word over and over again, or worse, the same phrase over and over again. And I say that as someone who, when my editor came back, she told me I'd used the same word 50 times, and that was bad. And then I used the same phrase like 3 times in the manuscript, and it was like, the first time it was like, oh, it's great. And the second time it's like, oh, you've already used this. And then the third time it was like, okay, stop now. And then obviously there's the copy edit, which is where you look at more like minutia, which is your punctuation, spelling, grammar, dialogue tags, repetition, especially like close repetition, not just using the same word throughout the entire manuscript over and over again, like it's going out of fashion. POV, especially if you have multiple POVs. Tense, because you'll be surprised how often you might slip into past or present tense, depending on which one you're on. So yeah, that's what you try and catch that. And things like inconsistencies, and that can be from like the world building itself or character descriptions. And we did do an episode, I cannot remember what it is, I will try and remember for attaching it, about when a style sheet can be really useful, because this is when you want to start being aware of the words you're using, whether it's something that's capitalized or italicized, whether you write words with accents or not, things like that. And that's where your style sheet comes in. Again, we've talked about style sheets, I'm not doing it now. And then the final edit is a proofread, which is literally where you read through the thing again to catch anything else you've missed, if possible. Now, obviously, if you have a professional editor, which you should, if you're doing a full manuscript, you will need to go through some of these, or most likely all of these. But you should do them too. If you're going to do an edit, your own edit, because again, you should edit your own manuscript, it's a good idea to do these for yourself. So your first edit is just a read through and you're doing a big pass. Again, I should probably preface this by saying this is what I recommend. This is not like a be all and end all. This is just what I recommend. You do a big read through and look at the strengths of the first chapter, look at the rising action, look at how the story is flowing, make sure there's a good pacing, look out for that sagging middle syndrome that a lot of us get. Again, we have done an episode about that. Look at the action and beat points, make sure they work. And if possible, this first read, try and read it like a reader. And I appreciate that is so hard because we're writers, and even when we read books for enjoyment, we kind of read them as writers, don't we? You just can't get away with it. You're just stuck in writer mode. But are there bits that need more explanation? Are there parts that slow down or get a little bogged down in detail? And yes, we are talking about the infamous info dump that often happens at the beginning. But it doesn't have to just happen at the beginning. It could be halfway through. You might have just been deciding, oh, shit, I need to explain all of this and just start throwing information in. You want to kind of keep an eye on that. Does the conflict work? Is there conflict? I mean, most stories need some form of conflict. It doesn't have to be some world-ending thing. It could literally be an internal conflict. But do you have it? And does it get resolved at the end? And if it doesn't, does it at least move the reader forward towards a second book if that's been planned? And you can kind of like, throw a cliffhanger in or something. You also want to look at, are your characters developing? Do they change throughout the story? Because they should. And it doesn't have to be some big growth thing where they're like, oh my God, I was a horrible person and now I'm brilliant. You could have someone who was maybe very confident and then by the end they're like doubting everything. It doesn't have to be like going into a positive of like, wow, they grew and learned and became brilliant. Sounds a little boring sometimes. You also want to see if there are any unanswered questions that you have. And yes, again, as the writer, you probably know a lot, but as you read through, ask questions, put them in the chapters, and then start looking back and answering them.
I want to kind of squeeze in here for a moment. First, I want to say before you do your first edit, personally, I think you should take a break. Once you complete your manuscript, take at least 2 weeks off. Don't look at your manuscript. Don't even think about writing or your character. I mean, you can write, but like, don't think about that particular project. So that way, when you do sit down to do your work on your first edit, you sit down with a fresh mind to actually look and see what's quote unquote wrong with the manuscript, because that's the whole point of editing. After you take that break and you go through your first edit, I think this is actually where that style sheet really comes into play. And I say this as somebody who does not do this, but I think I will try to do this for my next project. I think instead of editing as you write, which I know some people do that, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, if there's a typo, you're going to go back and fix it. If you screw up somebody's name, you're going to go back and fix it. Because if you're thinking about it, you should do it. But instead of editing as you write, I think working on that style sheet as you write is a good way to go, because the style sheet at that point isn't set in stone, so that when you do that first round of edits, you can use your style sheet as a guideline, and any changes that are made, you can update the style sheet. If something in the style sheet no longer makes sense, well, you could just change it right then and there. Or if something does make sense, you could say, oh, I had this initial idea and it was a good idea. I'm going to stick with it, but I'm not consistent with it in the manuscript. So you can follow along the style sheet then and there. And obviously keep the style sheet updated as you go. And I also want to say, Ari said that your first edit should be a big pass through and look at the strength of the first chapter, et cetera, et cetera. But I also do think that you should just read it and get yourself you should read it and familiarize yourself with the book again. There are times where I wish we could like edit our words as we're speaking. I can't just hit the backspace. Yeah, familiarize yourself with the manuscript again because you took that break. Of course you did. You listened to me. That's the one thing you listened to Rachel about. And just read it and make notes of edits that you want to make. Don't actually start going in and editing the nitty-gritty type of stuff unless you have like a really big thought and you have to write it down. But that's what I like to do. When I read through it the first time, I like to make a list of edits before I start actually editing or making any big changes and crossing things out. I just like to make a list so that I can get myself better organized for the second draft.
I will agree that you should definitely take a break. My bad for completely missing that. Yes, you should take a break. At least 2 weeks, longer if you've been like heavy in the writing and you're kind of like a little bit sick to death, which can happen. I will edge with the devil's advocate regarding just read through. And this is specifically me. I have tried that in the past and sometimes it works. Sometimes I'm halfway through and then I'm like, where's the pen? I've got to start making, and then suddenly it becomes a big edit. So I'm like, well, you might as well big edit. So yes, there is no definitive you should do this. These are always going to be our opinions and our experience. And Rachel's right. For sometimes you could just want to just read through it. Try not to touch the pen. Just read, feel the story as a reader. However, if that doesn't work, feel free to get that pen and start making the notes. See what works best for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the whole point. You got to see what works best for you. And as I say this all the time, not every single novel is going to be the same. But I do like my checklists.
Yes, we're big on checklists. Checklists are always great. Also, if you're a new writer, because this is technically where this episode is aimed at, you might not know what you prefer. You might not know whether you want to be doing a big edit straight off the back of a break or whether you want to do a read through. Try them. just pick one and try it and see how you feel. If you're halfway through a read through, you're like, nope, no, I need to start editing. I'm seeing too many errors. Or if you're like, oh, I'm trying to do this big edit and I'm like, oh, I'm getting bogged down, then shift. The best thing comes from experience, and we don't always know what works best until we try it. There are authors out there who will write and edit as they go. There are people who don't want to do that. I used to do that all the time, and sometimes I'd finish and sometimes I wouldn't. I try not to edit constantly now because it slows me down. Other people, they edit and write at the same time and they get those books finished. So again, it really is dependent on what works for you in your own way.
Alternatively, and this can royally screw you up depending, because once you take that break and then you go back to that manuscript, you don't really want to go back to something that's edited per se. But I will say, if you are brand new to writing and you've never edited a manuscript before or anything, you can get outside help. And obviously, you can get critique partners and beta readers and then editors down the line. But if you have a really good writer friend who you trust and you guys write together a lot and you guys are very close and talk about your work a lot together, when you finish that first draft, you can give it to them if they're willing to read it, even if they just read the beginning or the first three chapters. While you take your 2 week break, they can read it and then give you kind of like a starting point on how to edit or where, just where to start when it comes to looking for errors and stuff. Because I know a big part of editing is, well, at least for me, when I first started writing and my editing journey, I had no idea what I was supposed to be looking for when it came to edits. So that in and of itself can be a huge hurdle. So I know we don't really talk about giving our first drafts to anybody, but hey, it can help sometimes if you just give it to somebody you trust and say, just read the first three chapters, give me a starting point. What are your initial thoughts? What do you think some of my strengths are? What do you think some of my weaknesses are? And leave it at that. And then that way, when you get to working on the actual edits after your 2+ week break, then you have kind of an idea of what you need to look out for. And like I said, that can royally screw you up because you're sitting down with a fresh mind at your manuscript, and if there's a couple of red marks in it, it can be very overwhelming. So that it's just a thought. That's not for everybody. You don't have to try it if you don't want to, but it's just a random thought I had.
I can understand that. When I used to write years and years ago, I had a friend I was close with, and we would write in scenes, and we would then swap scenes if we had a writing session, and we would swap scenes. And it was more just to get a feel of like, especially when you're learning your voice and your style, and you weren't sure what parts you were really good at. So sometimes you needed someone else to be like, wow, your descriptions are really strong, but your dialogue is weak as shit. And vice versa, you needed someone to be able to say that. If you're going to do that, I would recommend only sending a little bit. You don't want to overwhelm somebody with a full, very first draft. And I would make sure it's very clear that it's a first draft because you don't want someone thinking, oh my God, this is how you write. And it's like, no, it's first draft. It's meant to be a bit shit.
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you did with your friend. My friend and I used to do the same thing as well. And I don't think we realized that we were actually editing. We were editing without editing. We were just swapping our scenes and chapters back and forth because we were so excited that we were like, hey, I wrote the next part. You want to read it? And we would read it and then we would talk about it. So we were kind of editing without realizing it, if you will. And that's kind of part of the fun of it. So that's what I mean. If you're writing a book, find somebody that you trust and you're going on the writing journey with before you do anything else. Just
Yeah, definitely. She just definitely needs to be someone you trust and someone who there is a little bit of reciprocity because you don't want to be the only person ever sharing stuff because then it might feel like a weird power dynamic. So having someone like that, like Rachel, like me, where it's like, oh yeah, we'll sometimes swap the same, swap scenes because we were writing together. If you're in a little writing pair, that can be really helpful. Just to get just to know you're on the right track. That can be really good. I did forget to mention something, and I'm going to say it. If you have the ability to print your manuscript out when you do your edit, obviously, I appreciate, first of all, not everyone has printers, not everyone has the accessibility of printing that many pages, depending on how much you've got. It really works if you can do it like space and a half or 2 spaces between each line, which again adds to the amount of paper you need and ink and everything. But if you have the ability to and are able to hit that cost, I do recommend it. If you aren't, We recommend changing the font, either the font style or the font size or the color, something just to make it easier to spot errors. It is shocking how making a slight change like that will make you spot errors that you didn't see.
I was just going to add that if you don't want to waste too much paper and ink all at once, print out once you finish every 3 chapters, print that bit out. So that way over time you're working on it. So you're still spending the same amount of ink and paper, but it just doesn't seem like it because it's not all at once.
That's true. And if you can get hold of like cheap scrap paper, and if you can do your printing on like quick draft of anything that's ink saving, do it. Seriously. Do not use like printer paper and really good quality ink on the highest setting. Don't do that. Make it cheap as chips as you can. Do you hear that, cheap as chips? Is that a thing you have over there? Or is it just an English thing?
No.
Yeah, no, just an Okay. So yeah, if possible, try and do the bigger, chunkier things first. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want to spend all your time going through the manuscript, finding all the spelling and grammar errors, and then trying to fix the beautiful descriptions, only to find out later that half of it has to be cut because the story is slowed down by an unnecessary part, or you're changing some of the plot, and then this wonderful scene you've written is getting ripped away. So that's why we go for the big stuff first before we start on the smaller stuff. Then you want to go to your line edit, and that's where you're looking for clarity and style. You want to look at strength of description and sentences. You want to make sure that it works well for the flow. Things like if you're using shorter, punchier sentences when it's a faster action, or there's an argument or something where the energy is a little bit higher. And then if you've got maybe a quest or something where people are like on a long journey and it's very tiring, then you can use longer language sentences to add this slower, drawn out feel. These are really good in line edits. You also want to tighten any of the descriptions so you're not repeating yourself. I found that a few times, and well, I should say my editor found that with me, and she kept trying like, you've said this like 3 times in the same sentence. And it's like, oh yeah, I did, didn't I? I just said it differently. And it's like, so try and catch anything like that. And seriously, you find so many things. And don't worry, you're not going to catch it all. It's going to go through betas, critique partners, you again, editors, and there will still be things you miss. So just be okay with it. Seriously. I think, Rachel, you may have frozen if you can hear me. I'm going to carry on. If possible, try and use a read aloud or you read the story aloud to yourself. That can be really helpful. You can catch things. I think it's actually better to use a read aloud function to do it for you, because we have a habit of just, as we're reading, we can skip our own, you read through it, you can skip the errors sometimes. So having a program like Words Read Aloud or anything like that read the story back to you, it's more likely to catch things that you might skip. I'm going to wait because Rachel has been kicked out and she's coming back. Are you back?
My God, it's still recording.
Is it? I hope so.
As soon as I joined the meeting, it said recording in progress and the thing is still there. So hopefully the audio isn't too screwed up for you. See, I made you co-host. So that's why I
That might
didn't
be
boot
why it
you out
stayed. Yeah.
either. So hopefully, sorry
Yeah.
about that. I don't know. You froze, so I was trying to chat with you and then everything just went.
I just did
Yeah.
the read aloud and the read function.
I concur with the reading aloud. I do that with my books. I kind of kill 2 birds with one stone. When I'm proofreading, when I'm at that stage, like the very last stage, I will like read it aloud to myself and then I will listen back to it like I'm listening to an audiobook while I'm reading along with the manuscript and I'm hearing it and reading it. But obviously, you can do that at any stage. You don't have to wait until the very last moment. If you really feel stuck, reading aloud can really help you hear how everything is. And I apologize if I'm repeating if anything Ari just said because I got kicked out of the meeting. But I concur.
See, sometimes we have these technical issues, but we just keep going. I mean, you don't have to do all of the different types of edits before you send it to your betas. I would recommend, if you want to use betas, I would recommend at least doing a few passes yourself. And if nothing else, do the big, meaty developmental edit to try and catch any of the bigger issues. We've mentioned it before. If you can use questions every time you hit an issue or you're not sure about something, or you're thinking, will the reader get this? Because obviously a lot of times you have to infer something. You don't have to blurt it straight out like, this is a red herring. You infer things. So, you can make notes of that, make questions. That can be really helpful. You may also be the sort of person that finds it really useful to use highlighters. Again, if you're printing it out, grab the pack of highlighters. If you're doing it online, use the little highlighter pen. I admit I don't use highlighters in my manuscripts unless it's literally I highlight one area that says need to write a description here. That's it. But I know a lot of writers who will use highlighters in different colors that mark out maybe the character development, that mark out the main part of the plot, that mark out different POVs or anything. So again, there are different methods of editing that you might find useful. And I think we've discussed several types of editing, and there's probably a million more out there. Try not to get overwhelmed with it. Expect it to take longer than you realize. It's like, it depends on how long you were writing, you may take a long time to do the edits because it's not a quick thing. If you want a good product, you want a good story that's readable, that's engaging, you need to put the effort in with the edits and pay for professional edits and everything and proofreaders and whatnot, but try not to let it overwhelm you and find what works best for you. This is just one suggestion that kind of like, if you're really struggling, at least do this will help, I think. I don't know you. You might not, but try different things. And again, here's another interesting thing. Depending on what you write, you might find something different works. I write big, scary, massive tomes that are way too long, high fantasy, but I also write shorter stories. I don't use the same editing for both because the shorter stories don't have the same depth of world building. They don't have the same multi-level plot points and multiple POVs. A lot of my others have like one or two POVs. So I don't have the same editing requirements on both because they're slightly different stories. So that can make a difference.
That's actually... Oh, Ari's gone too. Cool.
Hi.
Did you hear anything I said? Oh God, you're already frozen. Oh no, you're back. Jeez. No, you're good. You're good.
No, I don't think I did. I think you said like a very beginning and then that was it.
All right. Well, I'm still technically recording. You're not, because did it just boot you out too, or did you leave when I disappeared?
I left. I left you notes. It might not have come up in the chat, and then I left. So I thought it's just not for it's non-freeze.
Oh,
Obviously,
see,
I need to come back in to be able to finish it.
I never even saw your chat message. Okay, I'm gonna say what I said real quick and then just wrap the fucking thing up. What you just said is a really good point. Earlier, when Ari mentioned that you should know the different types of edits, you should probably also have a good understanding of the genre you're writing in and also your audience or the readers that read in that genre. Obviously, the audience can come a little bit later as you kind of try to find your place, but every genre has its own set of tropes and cliches and like things that readers expect to be within that genre. So whatever you write in, make sure that you have a good understanding of that genre so that you can edit specifically for that genre. That's it. I'm done.
That's really good. I like it. I concur. I have no more notes. Since we've been having some technical issues, because I also got kicked out and had to come back in, we're going to end this here, and hopefully it's been somewhat helpful. Now we want to hear your thoughts. What is your approach to editing your manuscript? And specifically, if you are an author who has been writing for a while, what advice can you give to new writers regarding editing your their manuscript? Leave a comment and let us chat about it. That would be good. Remember, we release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we are discussing evaluating your author proof. To ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. If you'd like to learn more about us, check out our website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com and our coffee page for more content. Thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. Rachel's gone again. Zoom is being really dickish. This podcast is brought to you by excessive caffeine. We drink a lot. It's also brought to you by really bad tech that seems to constantly boot us out. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0. Hopefully all of this will have been recorded and we won't have to redo this episode because that would be terrible. We hate redoing episodes.